Cathravus stood at the observation window of the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Promise and watched the stars drift past like scattered diamonds against black velvet. Her forearms crossed over her armored chest as she thought about the strange turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, she was Thraxian, born of a warrior clan that had conquered 3 star systems before most species learned to build fire. And her body showed her heritage clearly, standing 7 feet tall with scales the color of burnished copper covering her muscular frame. Each scale harder than steel and sharp enough to cut flesh if touched the wrong way. Her eyes were golden and slitted like a predator's, and her teeth could tear through metal plating if she needed them to be every measure of strength that mattered in the galaxy. She was magnificent, and yet here she was, married to a human. She turned from the window and looked across their shared quarters to where Marcus Chun sat reading something on his datapad, his soft brown eyes moving across the screen while his lips occasionally quirked into a small smile at whatever story he was enjoying. He was small by her standards, barely 6 feet tall, with smooth skin the color of warm sand that bruised if you looked at it too hard. He had no claws, no fangs, no armor, no venom glands. Nothing that would help him survive even a minor confrontation with the weakest predators in the known galaxy. Her clan elders had arranged this marriage as a political gesture, a sign of goodwill between the Thraxian Empire and the growing human coalition. And when Kethra had first seen her intended husband, she had felt something close to despair. This was who they had chosen for her. This fragile creature, who needed to sleep for 8 hours every single night, and who could die from drinking contaminated water the other Thraxians on the ship pitied her. She knew this because she caught their glances when she walked the corridors with Marcus, saw the way they quickly looked away as if embarrassed on her behalf. A warrior of her standing bound to such a weak mate. It was almost an insult. Marcus looked up from his datapad and caught her staring at him. "Everything okay?" he asked in that gentle voice of his, always so calm and quiet. "I'm fine," she said, perhaps too quickly. "I was merely thinking." He nodded and returned to his reading, not pressing her for more information the way a Thraxian male would have. Humans were strange that way. They seemed to understand when someone wanted silence. Or perhaps they simply lacked the courage to push Kethra, moved to her training corner, and began her evening exercises, flowing through combat forms that her grandmother had taught her. Each movement precise and deadly. She could feel Marcus watching her from the corner of his eye, and she wondered what he thought when he saw her like this. Was he afraid of her, intimidated by her strength, grateful that she had sworn not to harm him as part of their marriage vows? She finished her forms and grabbed a hydration pack, drinking deeply while her scales slowly shifted from the deep red of exertion back to their normal copper tone. "That was beautiful," Marcus said softly. She blinked at him. "It is not meant to be beautiful. It is meant to kill. Those aren't mutually exclusive," he replied with a small smile. Then he stood and stretched, his joints making small popping sounds that always concerned her, even though the ship's doctor assured her it was normal for humans. "I'm going to check on my garden before dinner. Want to come?" His garden, another thing she did not understand about her husband. He had requested permission to set up a small hydroponic growing station in one of the unused cargo bays, and he spent hours there every day tending to strange earth plants with names like tomatoes and basil and peppers. It seemed like such a waste of time to her. They had food synthesizers that could produce anything they needed. But Marcus insisted that growing things with his own hands brought him peace. She followed him anyway because she had nothing better to do, and because despite her frustration with this marriage, she found that she did not entirely dislike his company. The cargo bay had been transformed. Rows of growing trays lined the walls under artificial sunlight, and the air smelled green and alive in a way that was foreign to her. Marcus moved between the plants with careful steps, checking leaves and adjusting nutrient feeds, and occasionally talking to the growing things in a low murmur. You talk to them as if they can hear you, Kethra observed. Maybe they can. Maybe they can't, Marcus shrugged. But it makes me feel better. And some studies suggest plants respond to sound vibrations. So, who knows? She watched him work and noticed something she had seen before, but never really examined. The way he moved through the space was deliberate, almost calculated. His eyes swept across everything before he stepped. And his hands always seemed to know exactly where they were going before they got there. It was subtle, so subtle she might have imagined it. But it reminded her of something she could not quite name. Marcus, she said suddenly. Why did you agree to this marriage? He paused with his hands in the soil of a tomato plant and looked at her with those soft brown eyes. Because my people needed the alliance, and because I thought I might actually like you if I got to know you. And do you? Like me. I'm working on it, he said with a grin that held no malice. You're prickly and proud, and you look at me sometimes like you're wondering if I'd make a decent emergency food supply. But you're also honest and loyal, and you haven't once tried to make me feel small for being what I am. So yeah, I think I like you. Before she could respond, the ship shuddered violently and the lights flickered to red. A blaring alarm filled the air with its harsh scream. And Kethra's combat instincts kicked in immediately as she dropped into a defensive stance. Proximity alert, the ship's computer announced in its calm synthetic voice. 3 vessels emerging from hyperspace. Configuration matches Vrecken Raider class. All hands to battle stations. Kethra felt her blood go cold. The Vrecken were the most feared slavers in this sector. Insectoid monsters who took prisoners for their fighting pits and breeding farms if they caught the Harmony's promise. Death would be the kindest fate anyone aboard could hope, for she looked at Marcus and saw something strange. His face had gone blank in a way she had never seen before. All the warmth and gentleness draining away like water through sand, and for just a moment. His eyes held something that looked almost like anticipation. Then he blinked, and the expression vanished, replaced by what she expected to see. Fear and uncertainty. What do we do? He asked in a voice that trembled slightly. We fight, Kethra said grimly, already moving toward the door. Stay here and hide. I will come back for you when it is safe. She did not wait for his response before running toward the sound of battle. Her mind already focused on the enemies she would face. And so she did not see the way her husband's expression changed once she was gone. The way his trembling stopped and his posture shifted and his eyes began to sweep the cargo bay with cold calculation. She did not see him smile. The lower decks of the Harmony's Promise had become a nightmare of screaming metal and dying screams as Kethra fought her way through. Corridors that were never designed for war, the Vrecken had breached. Through 3 airlocks simultaneously, their boarding pods punching through the ship's hull like claws through flesh. And now dozens of the insectoid horrors poured into the vessel with weapons raised and mandibles clicking in their terrible hunting. Langrugethra had fought Vrecken before, during her years as a warrior before her assignment to diplomatic duty, and she remembered them as fearsome opponents. Each one stood nearly as tall as a Seem, Thoraxian, but their bodies were covered in chitinous armor that could deflect most energy weapons. Their forearms ended in serrated blades of natural bone that could cut through steel, and their compound eyes saw in spectrums that made hiding nearly impossible. But memory had softened the reality. And now she remembered why her people feared these creatures. She ducked under a slashing blade and drove her own armored fist into the joint between a Vrecken's thorax and abdomen, feeling the satisfying crunch of chitin giving way beneath her strength. The creature shrieked and collapsed, but 2 more immediately took its place, their weapons humming with that distinctive whine she had been dreading. Neural disruptors. Illegal in most civilized space, but the Vrecken had never cared about laws. One hit from those, Weapons would scramble her nervous system and leave her helpless on the ground while they did whatever they wanted to her. She grabbed a fallen Reckon's blade and used it to deflect a disruptor bolt, the energy crackling across the bone weapon and making her arm go numb from the transferred shock. But she kept fighting because stopping meant dying, or worse. The ship's security chief, a burly Pellerin named Grath, fought beside her with his ceremonial force pike, and together they held the corridor junction while the remaining crew tried to evacuate toward the bridge. Grath was good, nearly as good as Kethra herself, but even he was starting to show signs of fatigue as more and more of Reckon pushed through the breach. "There are too many," Grath growled between strikes, his voice strained with effort. "We need to fall back to the secondary bulkhead. If we fall back, they will reach the civilian quarters," Kethra replied. "We hold here." She knew it was a losing strategy, even as she said it. But her warrior's pride refused to let her abandon the people she had sworn to protect. Somewhere behind her, Marcus was hiding in that cargo bay with his plants, probably terrified out of his mind, and she would not let these monsters reach him. Of Reckon got past her guard and slammed into her chest, its bladed arms raking across her scales and drawing blood where they found the gaps in her natural armor. She roared and grabbed the creature's head, twisting until she felt its neck snap. But the moment of distraction cost her. The neural disruptor bolt hit her in the back. It felt like liquid fire pouring through her veins, every nerve in her body screaming in agony as the weapon's energy disrupted the signals between her brain and her muscles. She collapsed to the deck, her limbs twitching uselessly, a jaw locked so tight she could not even cry out through blurring vision. She saw Grath fall beside her, his own body jerking from a disruptor hit. And then the Vrekin were standing over them, their compound eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction as one of them raised its serrated blade for the killing stroke. "This is how I die," Kethra thought with strange clarity. Not in glorious battle, but helpless on the floor, like prey. The blade began to descend, and then the Vrekin's head snapped back as something silver flashed through the air and buried itself in the soft tissue at the base of its skull, the only spot on a Vrekin's body not protected by chitin. The creature made a wet gurgling sound and collapsed, and Kethra's paralyzed eyes could only stare as a figure stepped out of the shadows behind the remaining attackers. It was Marcus, but it was not the Marcus she knew. Gone was the gentle gardener with the soft eyes and the warm smile. In his place stood something else entirely, something that moved through the corridor like death given human form. He held a weapon in his hands that Kethra did not recognize at first, and then she realized it was a gardening tool. A simple hand rake that had been sharpened to a razor edge and attached to a broken pipe to give it reach. Did not fight like a warrior. There was no honor display, no battle cry, no fierce challenge issued to his enemies. He simply moved between the Vrekin with terrible efficiency, each strike finding the gaps in their armor with surgical precision. The soft joint at the neck, the thin membrane behind the knees, the vulnerable connection between head and thorax. 3 Vrekin died in as many seconds, their bodies hitting the deck before they even understood they were under attack. The remaining raiders finally reacted, turning their weapons toward this new threat, but Marcus was already moving, using the bodies of their fallen comrades as cover, throwing another of his improvised projectiles to force them into positions he wanted them in. He fought like he was playing a game whose rules only he understood, like he had already seen how this would end and was simply going through the motions. One Vrekin managed to fire its neural disruptor at him, and Kethra's heart clenched with fear because she knew what that weapon would do to a human's fragile body. Marcus twisted sideways, and the bolt passed so close to his face that it singed his hair. But he did not stop moving, did not even flinch, and a moment later his makeshift blade was buried in the shooter's eye socket. The Corridor fell silent except for the ragged breathing of the two paralyzed warriors on the floor, and the soft footsteps of the human walking toward. Then Marcus knelt beside Kethra, and his face swam into focus above her. She looked into his eyes and saw no fear there. No trembling, only a cold and calculating intelligence that assessed her condition. With the detachment of a medic examining a wound, the paralysis will wear off in about 10 minutes, he said in a voice utterly unlike the gentle tone she was used to hearing. Neural disruptors are nasty but not permanent. You'll be fine. She tried to speak, but her jaw was still locked. So he seemed to understand her unspoken question anyway. I need to secure the engine room, he continued, already standing and checking the corridor in both directions. If they take the engines, they can jump us to a Vrecken outpost and will never be found. Stay here and recover. I'll handle this. He turned to go, and Kethra managed to force a single word through her paralyzed throat. Rough and barely audible, but enough. How? Marcus paused and looked back at her. And for just a moment she saw something ancient and terrible behind his eyes. Something that had been waiting a very long time for this moment. Everyone underestimates humans, he said quietly. It's one of our greatest advantages. Then he was gone, disappearing into the smoke-filled corridors of the dying ship. And Kethra lay on the deck surrounded by the bodies of her enemies and realized that she had never truly seen her husband until Nan she had dismissed as weak. The soft creature she had pitied and protected. He had been wearing a mask this entire time, and she was suddenly very grateful that he was on her side. The paralysis faded from Kethra's body like ice melting under a warm sun. First her fingers twitched, then her arms. And finally she was able to push herself up from the blood-slicked deck and lean against the corridor wall, while her nervous system remembered how to function properly. Grath recovered beside her, the big Pellerin groaning as sensation returned to his limbs. His 4 eyes blinking rapidly as he tried to make sense of what had happened. What killed them? He rasped, looking at the Vrecken corpses scattered around them. My husband, Kethra said, and the words felt strange in her mouth, like she was describing a creature from mythology, rather than the man she had shared meals with for 6 months. She helped Grath to his feet, and they made their way to the nearest functioning terminal. The ship's internal sensors were damaged, but still partially operational. And what they showed made Kethra's breath catch in her throat. Marcus was everywhere. The human moved through the ship's maintenance corridors like a ghost, appearing behind Vrecken patrols and vanishing before they could react. The sensors tracked him by heat signature alone, since he had somehow disabled his communicator's locator beacon. And that heat signature wove through the ship in patterns that seemed almost random until Kethra realized what she was seeing. He was hurting them every kill. Every ambush, every sealed door, and triggered alarm pushed the Vrecken forces toward specific locations, away from the civilian quarters and the bridge, toward the lower decks where the ship's more dangerous systems waited. As she watched, Marcus reached an environmental control panel and did something to it. A moment later, an entire section of corridor vented its atmosphere into space, taking 7 Vrecken with it. The human had sealed himself in a maintenance closet 30 seconds before the breach occurred. How did he know which section to vent? Grath whispered, his voice filled with something that might have been fear. He has been studying the ship, Kethra realized slowly, remembering all those evenings when Marcus had sat reading on his datapad. 6 months, every night. He has been learning every system, every vulnerability, every emergency protocol. The terminal crackled, and Marcus's voice came through the ship-wide intercom. Calm and almost friendly in a way that made the hair on Kethra's neck stand up. Attention, Vrecken Raiders. This is the human. You have invaded my home and threatened my family. I want you to know that I am going to give you one chance to return to your ships and leave. If you choose not to take this offer, I will kill every single one of you. Please respond on any open channel." Silence followed. And then the Vrekin commander's voice came back harsh and mocking, speaking in broken common that dripped with contempt. "Weak flesh thing threatens us. We are Vrekin, we are death itself. We will take you alive and make you scream for years in our pits." "I was hoping you'd say that," Marcus replied. And Kethra could hear the smile in his voice. The lights in Corridor 7 flickered and died. And then the screaming Starda Kethra and Grath made their way toward the medical bay where the ship's doctor, a weathered Theraxian named Kress, who had served in the military for 30 years before retiring to civilian medicine, was treating the wounded. The doctor looked up as they entered, her golden eyes tired but alert. And she gestured toward the displays showing the ship's internal cameras. "Your human is quite something," Kress said, her voice carefully neutral. "You do not seem surprised," Kethra observed. "I served with humans during the border conflicts. 3 years embedded with a human special forces unit." Kress shook her head slowly. "They are not what they appear to be, any of them." "What do you mean?" Kress pulled up a medical diagram on her screen, showing a human body with annotations highlighting various systems. "Humans evolved on a death world," the doctor began. "Their planet tried to kill them constantly. Extreme temperatures, predators, diseases, natural disasters. And they survived not by being stronger or faster than their enemies, but by being more persistent." She pointed to the cardiovascular system. "Their hearts can operate at elevated stress levels for hours, days even. Where most species would collapse from exhaustion, a human simply keeps going. There are documented cases of humans pursuing prey for entire days without rest, simply following at a steady pace until the creature they were hunting died from exhaustion." Grath made a sound of disbelief. "That is not possible. It is not only possible. It is how they became the dominant species on their world," Kress continued. "But that is not the worst part. Watch this." She switched to a camera feed showing Marcus moving through a smoke-filled corridor. There was blood on his arm, clearly visible through a tear in his clothing. But he did not seem to notice it at all. His movements were just as fluid and precise as before. "Humans can suppress pain," Kress said quietly. "Not ignore it, not endure it, actually suppress it through chemical processes in their own brains. When they need to function, they simply decide that the pain does not matter. And their bodies obey. That is terrifying." "Yes," Kress finished. "And there is more. Their brains are wired differently than ours. When most species encounter extreme stress, their higher functions shut down and instinct takes over. But humans, their problem-solving abilities actually improve under pressure. The more desperate the situation, the more creative and dangerous they become." On the screen, Marcus had cornered a group of Vrekin in the cargo bay where he kept his garden. Instead of fighting them directly, he was talking to them, his voice calm and reasonable, even as he slowly maneuvered around the space. And Kethra realized with growing unease that he was positioning himself near specific containers. "What is he doing?" she asked. "Being human," Kress said grimly. "Watch." Marcus moved suddenly, grabbing something from a shelf and throwing it toward the Vrekin. They flinched back expecting a weapon, but it was just a container of fertilizer. Harmless white powder that scattered across the floor and there. Chitinous bodies. Then Marcus grabbed a small device from another shelf and triggered it, the spark igniter for his gardening equipment. The fertilizer explodeketh. Ra stared at the screen in shock as the blast knocked the Vrekin off their feet. The explosion was not powerful enough to kill them, but it disoriented them completely. And Marcus was already moving through the smoke like a predator among wounded prey. He made a bomb from gardening supplies. Grath whispered. "Humans can make weapons from anything," Kress said. "They have had to. Their history is written in blood and fire. Every generation facing some new threat that should have destroyed them. Plagues that killed half their population, wars that burned their cities to ash, disasters that made their planet nearly uninhabitable. And every single time they survived, adapted, and came back stronger. She turned to look at Kethra directly. Her old eyes filled with something that might have been sympathy. You married a human warrior. You thought you were getting a soft and gentle creature who needed your protection. Cress shook her head slowly. What you actually got was a member of the most stubborn, adaptable, and ruthlessly persistent species the galaxy has ever seen. And right now, he is showing the Vrekin exactly why the rest of the universe should be very careful about threatening the things a human loves. On the screen, the last Vrekin in the cargo bay fell, and Marcus paused just long enough to check that his tomato plants had survived the explosion. Then he moved on, heading toward the engine room, and the ship's sensors showed more Vrekin dying with every step he took. Athera watched her husband disappear into the smoke and realized that she had never been the protector in this marriage. She had been the protected one all along. 16 hours. That was how long the siege lasted. 16 hours of constant battle as the Vrekin poured reinforcements through their boarding pods, and Marcus Chen showed them why humans should never be underestimated. Tedcar had recovered enough to fight by the 4th hour, and she tracked her husband through the ship until she finally caught up with him near the engineering section. He was crouched behind a makeshift barricade made of cargo containers, his face smeared with blood and soot and something that might have been Vrekin ichor. And when he saw her, his expression flickered with something that looked almost like relief before the cold mask settled back into place. You should be with the other survivors, he said flatly. My place is beside my husband, Kethra replied, settling into position next to him. Whether I thought so before or not, something shifted in his eyes, a crack in the armor he had built around himself, and for just a moment she saw the man she had married, the gentle gardener who talked to his plants and smiled at her across the dinner table. Okay, he said softly, stay low and watch my left side. They like to flank. She had never fought beside a human before, and the experience was unlike anything her years of warrior training had prepared her for. Marcus did not fight with the explosive fury of a Theraxian or the precise martial discipline of a Palaran. He fought like water, flowing around obstacles and through gaps, always moving, always adapting, always finding the path of least resistance to maximum damage, and he simply did not stop. By the 10th hour, Kethra was exhausted, her muscles burning and her scales cracked in a dozen places. But Marcus kept going, his movements slightly slower now but no less deadly. She saw him take a blade across the ribs at one point, and he barely flinched, just adjusted his stance to protect the wound and kept fighting. You are injured, she said during a brief lull in the combat. I know, he replied, not looking at the blood seeping through his torn shirt. I'll deal with it later. You could die. Then I'll die fighting, he said simply, but not before they do. The Vrekin had stopped mocking them over the communicators, stopped threatening and posturing. Now, when they spoke, it was in hushed whispers of fear. Fragments picked up by the ship's damaged sensors painted a picture of growing terror among the raiders. It will not stop, one Vrekin reported to its commander, its voice trembling in a way Kethra had never heard from one of their kind. It learns our patterns and changes. We cannot predict it. We cannot trap it. Every time we think we have it cornered, it escapes, and more of us die. Send more warriors. The commander responded, but even his voice had lost its earlier confidence. We've sent 93 warriors. 81 are dead. The human and his mate have killed them all. By the 15th hour, the remaining crew had been pushed back to the bridge. 18 survivors huddled behind barricades, while the Vrekin massed in the corridor outside for their final assault. There were still nearly 20 raiders left, enough to overwhelm the exhausted defenders through sheer numbers. Marcus sat against the wall, finally showing signs of the exhaustion he had been fighting for over half a day. His skin was pale, and his breathing was ragged. But his eyes remained sharp and focused. "I have a plan," he said to Kethra, his voice rough from smoke and screaming. "Of course you do. You're not going to like it. I have not liked anything about the last 16 hours. I doubt this will be different." He almost smiled at that, a ghost of his old warmth flickering across his battered face. Then he pulled up a schematic of the ship on a damaged datapad and began to explain. The ship's reactor was a standard antimatter containment system, normally the safest and most reliable power source in the galaxy. But Marcus had spent 6 months learning its every quirk and vulnerability. He knew exactly how to trigger a controlled overload that would vent superheated plasma through the cooling system. The plasma conduits run through specific corridors, he explained, tracing the paths on the schematic. If we seal the emergency bulkheads in the right sequence, we can channel the venting through the areas where Vrecken are massing. Grath leaned over to look at the plan, his 4 eyes widening with disbelief. The timing would have to be perfect. A fraction of a second off, and we would cook ourselves along with them. I know. You were talking about turning our own ship into a weapon. I'm talking about surviving, Marcus replied flatly. The Vrecken have stopped caring about taking prisoners. They want us dead now. Specifically, they want me dead because I've made this personal for them. If we don't end this soon, they'll breach this room and kill everyone. Kethra studied the schematic, her tactical mind working through the possibilities. It was insane, the kind of desperate gamble that only a madman would attempt. But as she looked at her husband, she realized that he had already accounted for every variable, already calculated every risk. You have been planning this since the beginning, she said slowly, since before they even boarded. I started planning it 6 months ago, Marcus admitted. When I first came aboard this ship, I identified every possible threat scenario and developed contingencies for each one. Wreck and Raid was scenario 7 on my list. You expected this. I expected something. He shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at his injured ribs. Humans always expect the worst. We have to. Our history taught us that nothing in the universe is ever kind to us. So we learned to be ready for everything. He looked around at the exhausted survivors, at the Thraxians and Pelorans and other species who had dismissed him as weak and useless, and his expression softened slightly. You're all my people now, he said quietly. You became my people the moment I married Kethra, and humans don't abandon our people. Ever. He turned to Kethra and met her eyes directly, and in that moment she saw both versions of her husband, the gentle gardener and the relentless warrior, existing together in perfect harmony. I need you to trust me, he said. I know I've been hiding what I am, and I know you have questions, but right now I need you to trust that I will get us through this. Kethra reached out and took his hand, his soft human skin against her armored scales, and she felt the strength in his grip despite his exhaustion. I trust you, she said. Husband. He squeezed her hand once, then stood and began issuing orders, his voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. The survivors moved to their positions without question, perhaps because they were too tired to argue, perhaps because they had seen what he could do and believed he could do more. Vrecken began their final assault, and Marcus Chun showed them exactly what happened when you threatened the things a human loved. The plan worked. Kethra would remember the sound for the rest of her life. The roar of superheated plasma venting through corridors that had been carefully sealed to channel its fury exactly where Marcus wanted it to go. The screams of 86 Vrecken dying in 17 seconds as the fire consumed them. The silence that followed broken only by the groaning of stressed metal, and the ragged breathing of survivors who could not quite believe they were still alive. The remaining raiders fled their ships, disconnected from the Harmony's promise, and jumped to hyperspace. So quickly, they did not even bother recovering their dead. And across every open communication channel, Kethra could hear them broadcasting warnings in a dozen languages. Avoid the human ship. Do not engage. It is not worth the cost. The human is death itself. She found Marcus collapsed against the bulkhead near the reactor control room, his body finally surrendering to the punishment it had endured for 16 straight hours. The ship's doctor reached him first, and her expression went pale as she assessed his injuries. Cracked ribs. 3 of them, Cress reported, her voice tight with professional concern. Dislocated shoulder that he somehow kept fighting with. 2nd-degree burns across his back. Blood loss from at least 7 lacerations. An exhaustion so severe I am amazed he is still conscious. Is he going to be okay? Kethra demanded. He should not be alive, Cress said flatly. Any other species would have collapsed hours ago. But humans, she shook her head in disbelief. Humans are different. They carried Marcus to the medical bay, and for 3 days he drifted in and out of consciousness, while his battered body fought to repair itself. Kethra stayed by his side the entire time, refusing to leave even when exhaustion threatened to pull her under. She watched him sleep and thought about everything she had believed and everything she had been wrong about. On the 3rd day, rescue ships arrived. A Thraxian patrol cruiser that had received their distress signal. The warriors who came aboard looked at the destruction with wide eyes, counting the Vrecken dead and listening to the survivors tell their story. 1 human did this, the patrol commander said incredulously, looking at Kethra as if expecting her to admit it was an exaggeration. 1 human, she confirmed. My husband. The commander looked at the small figure lying in the medical bed. This fragile creature was soft skin and no natural weapons. And Kethra could see him struggling to reconcile what he was seeing with what he had been told. The Vrecken are calling him a demon, the commander said slowly. They have added him to their list of threats to avoid at all costs, alongside Thraxian war fleets and Pellerin battle stations. 1 human is now ranked alongside entire military forces. He is not a demon, Kethra said quietly. He is simply human, and humans do not abandon their people. Marcus woke on the 4th day, his eyes opening slowly and focusing on Kethra's face above him. For a long moment he just looked at her, and she could see the questions forming behind his expression, wondering how she felt about him now that she knew what he truly was. Why? She asked before he could speak. Why did you hide this from me? He was silent for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Because I wanted you to know me first, he said finally, his voice rough from days of disuse. Not the soldier, not the survivor, just me. The man who grows tomatoes and reads books and talks to plants. I have been defined by violence my whole life. I wanted to see if I could be something else with you. And the fighting. The killing, you did not enjoy that. No, he said firmly. I never enjoy it, but I accept it. It is what I am. What all humans are when we need to be. We carry it inside us always, the capacity for terrible things. But we also carry the choice of when to let it out. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. I chose to let it out for you, he continued. For the crew, for everyone on this ship, because you are my people now. And protecting my people is the one thing I will never apologize for. Kethra thought about her clan elders, about the political arrangement that had brought them together, about the pity she had felt for herself being bound to such a weak mate. And she felt shame burn through her like fire. I'm sorry, she said, for thinking less of you, for assuming that your gentleness was weakness. It's okay, Marcus smiled weakly. Everyone assumes that about humans. It's actually kind of useful. It will not be assumed anymore. The Vrecken have told everyone what you did. Good, he said. And there was steel beneath the exhaustion in his voice. Let them tell stories. Let them warn each other. The more the galaxy fears what happens when you threaten human loved ones, the fewer times I will have to prove it. Rescue operations continued for another week. And during that time, Kethra watched her husband slowly return to himself. The cold efficiency of the warrior fading back beneath the warm gentleness of the gardener. He spent hours in the medical bay, helping Crest treat the wounded. His hands that had killed so efficiently, now working just as skillfully to heal when he was finally cleared for light activity. The first place he went was his garden. Kithra found him there, kneeling among the damaged hydroponic trays, carefully repotting a single tomato plant that had somehow survived the explosion he had triggered. His movements were slow and careful, treating the small green thing with the same focused attention he had given to killing Vrecken. Most of them died, he said without looking up. The explosion was bigger than I calculated. I lost almost everything. You can grow more. I know, he nodded. That is what plants do, what humans do. We get knocked down and we grow back, sometimes stronger than before. She knelt beside him, her forearms folding awkwardly as she tried to match his posture. And he glanced at her with a flicker of surprise. You were always this, she said slowly. Not weak, just waiting. I was hoping I would never have to stop waiting, he admitted. I was hoping I could just be a gardener for the rest of my life, grow things instead of destroying them. But when the Vrecken came, he shrugged. There was no choice. Not really, because we are your people, because you are my wife, he corrected, meeting her eyes. And that makes everyone you care about my people too. That is how it works with humans. Our circles expand. First ourselves, then our families, then our communities. And we will burn down worlds to protect anyone inside those circles. Kethra thought about this, about the implications of being married to someone who would literally fight an army for her. And she found that the thought did not frighten her as much as she might have expected. My clan elders will hear of what happened here, she said. By now, the story has probably spread across the entire Theraxian Empire. The warrior who married a human and watched him destroy nearly 100 Vrecken to protect her. Is that a problem? No, she said, and felt a smile tugging at her lips. It means that my embarrassing marriage has become the most envied union in my clan's history. Every warrior will wish they had a human of their own. Marcus laughed, the sound rough but genuine. And for a moment he looked like the man she had known before the invasion. The gentle soul who found joy in simple things. Tell them to be careful what they wish for, he said. Humans are high maintenance. We need a lot of sleep, and we break easily, and we have very specific dietary requirements. But you do not give up. No, he agreed. We never give up. Put us anywhere in the galaxy, and we will find a way to survive. Give us someone to love, and we will find a way to protect them. It is simply what we are. He held up the tomato plant, its leaves slightly scorched, but still reaching toward the artificial light. Put us anywhere, he repeated softly, and we find a way to grow. Kethra reached out with all 4 of her arms and helped him settle the plant into its new container. Their hands working together in the soil, building something new from the ruins of what had been destroyed for the first time. She understood why her elders had chosen this match. Not despite human weakness, but because they had recognized something the rest of the galaxy had missed. Something hidden beneath the soft skin and the gentle smiles, and the need for sleep. Humans were not weak. They were simply saving their strength for when it mattered, and now the whole galaxy knew it.